Vouching is seemingly a simple audit procedure, but if done correctly and carefully, it can cover a lot of audit observations and give useful insights into the quality of financial reporting of your audit client. Welcome back to AuditHaven with me, Maryam Waheed. In this video, I will guide you about the audit issues that can be identified through the procedure of vouching. I'm using professional expenses as an example, and this video is linked to my previous video on creating a basic vouching grid. I'm using the same vouching grid which I used in the previous relevant video. Here, the information that I entered was matching with the information as per the journal ledger. But often it will happen that you will see differences in the information while inspecting the invoices, and you will need to assess the impact of those discrepancies. Let's start from the date. Let's suppose the date was not April, but it was in March. This would mean that the management received the invoice earlier but recorded it later in their journal ledger. If the date is still within the year for which the audit opinion is being issued, this will not be a discrepancy because overall the expense would remain the same. So you may still inquire from the management why there is a gap between the date in the journal ledger and the date of the invoice, and you can just mention that in the remarks. This will not have an impact for your audit. Let's suppose the date was from the previous year. This would mean that the expense related to the previous year but has been booked in the current year. This means that the current year's expense is overstated and the previous year's expense was understated. This is a misstatement. You'll need to discuss this with the management and note it down in observations. But you will need to assess whether this misstatement is to be accumulated or not. If the amount of the misstatement, which is this one, is below the trivial threshold set for the audit, the misstatement will not be accumulated. If this amount is above the trivial threshold, this should be accumulated. Now, let's suppose that the audit opinion is being issued for a year which ends on 30th June 2025, and the invoice date is somewhere in July 2025. This means that an expense of the next year has been recorded in the previous period. This situation is rare, but it can still happen. You need to discuss this with management that why an invoice from a next period has been recorded now. A valid reason can be that the expense was incurred within the year ended 30th June 2025, but the invoice was received after the year end. If this sort of explanation is provided, you will need to perform some further procedures to corroborate management's response. Whatever responses you receive or whatever extra procedures you perform, make sure to document these in remarks column or anywhere else within this working. Let's move towards the next column, service provider. As you can see from here that the journal ledger does not mention from whom the services were received from. So whatever is the name of the service provider, it will not constitute an audit observation for you unless another document that you have inspected suggests that this service was not provided by the ABC firm. Moving on to the next column, address to. This is a risky area if the invoice is addressed not to your audit client, but let's suppose some XYZ company. And from the understanding of the entity, you do know that XYZ is a related party of your audit client. This will mean that the expense was actually incurred for XYZ but has been recorded in the books of your audit client. This is an audit observation. You will need to discuss this with management and accumulate it as per the trivial threshold. Moving on to the next column, description. You will need to make sure that the description mentioned on the invoice matches with the description as per the journal ledger, which in this case says advisory consultancy. Here it says consultancy expenses for ABC transaction. It does not seem like a discrepancy, but what if the description said something like professional advice in litigation? This means that there must have been a litigation where some professional services were received. And since it is not mentioned on the GL, there is a probability that the management did not disclose this legal case to you. Again, you will need to discuss the situation with the management and ensure that the transaction is properly classified in the journal ledger. Moving on towards the next column, amount. The first sort of error can simply a mismatch in the amount. Let's suppose this is 55K. This amount does not match with the amount in the journal ledger, and you will need to inquire the management about the reason. Let's suppose the amount is the same, but you notice that the currency as per the invoice is different from the currency as per the journal ledger. Then it will also mean that the amount is effectively different. This seems like an error by the management, and you will need to discuss management and assess the implications for the audit according to the trivial threshold. There can be instances where the invoice is not authorized at all. So, in those cases, request from the management for authorized copies of the invoices so that you can be sure that the company is following a proper procedure of getting the invoices authorized. I have discussed trivial threshold multiple times during this video. Let's suppose that the trivial threshold set for your audit is 30,000. In that case, the discrepancies that you would notice in this invoice will not be accumulated, but still cover those discrepancies and the reasons for those in the remarks column. Now, let's suppose the threshold is 15,000. Then it means that this amount is above the threshold and you will need to accumulate this amount. You can make sure that you're accumulating all the misstatements regarding your workings by keeping a separate track of them. Keep a separate Excel file and list down the details of all the misstatements that you're identifying in your audit work, which are above the trivial threshold. Then, during audit updates with your job in charge or manager, you can share the details of identified misstatements on timely basis so that your seniors can take appropriate action. So, when you're performing vouching, instead of just doing data entry, maintain your professional skepticism and be alert to these audit discrepancies or issues. This will greatly enhance the quality of your audit procedure. For more such useful insights, subscribe to AuditHaven. Take care, we'll see you in the next one.